boy, do I got a great show for you tonight. Tonight, I have retired Commander Ian Whitehouse from across the pond. Let's read a little bit about command. Command is very much about leadership, and no matter what your specialization or rank or station as a naval officer and sailors, you are all required and expected to lead. But as a commanding officer, you are alone in the care of lives and the well-being of your submarine crew. In some ways, you're given godlike powers to press unimaginable destruction upon an enemy, but also must be meticulous in nature and entirely responsible for the safe operation of a ship and at times even a nuclear power plant. Different countries have some doctrine and training on how to command their ships. But today, we embark on a series of interviews to see how our brothers in arms across the sea in the United Kingdom's Royal Navy Submarine Service have in common with some of our differences. How our submarine officers are selected in the United Kingdom Naval Service. How are they trained for their submarine service? Submarine Officer Program says the following. As a warfare officer, you're responsible from day one to be the boat's eyes, ears deep below the surface, and to promote stealth as your primary weapon, keeping the boat undetected at all times. Today we'll hear from differences in command style, perhaps culture in general, and then new phrases like command perisher course. But one thing's for sure, we are all brothers of arms deep as soon as we dive the ship. TheSubVet.com is pleased to welcome Commander Ian Whitehouse, Royal Navy Submarines, retired. How you doing, sir, tonight?
I'm doing well, Eric. Thanks very much. It's just gone 11 o'clock here in Cornwall, UK. It's been a good day. Temperature's up 75 degrees centigrade, blue skies. I've got a glass of scotch in one hand, and I'm really happy to be talking with you.
I really appreciate you staying up late for this. This is fantastic. I'm glad you reached out and
we've all done the middle before. So I spent 22 years in the Royal Navy. 16 of those were spent in the submarine service and included the command of a diesel electric boat, XO of an SSN, and command of an SSN. I also managed to cram in a 70-day patrol aboard the Los Angeles class USS Hyman G. Rickover back in 1990. Eric has asked me to talk about why and how I joined the Navy and my first steps into the submarine world, and I hope you find this of interest. But first I just want to preface the talk. The US Navy were the first Navy to introduce submarines to the world, operational submarines to the world, and the Holland class was that first submarine that came into being. The Royal Navy licensed through the US Navy the building of 6 Holland class submarines.
I didn't know that.
And we built them up in Barrow-in-Furness, where we built almost all our subsequent submarines. And when those 6 Holland class submarines were introduced, the Admiralty Board, responsible for the entire Royal Navy, discussed what to do with them. And one senior admiral described the submarine as a weapon as being underhand, unfair, and damned un-English.
I remember that phrase. Battleships were the thing of the day. I mean, it was about
That's
how
right.
many battleships you had. So,
gosh,
this is a good story
in
about
1901 we had 40 battleships probably. And he went on to say that all submariners should be hung as pirates in war. And I think certainly within the Royal Navy Submarine Service, and I believe in all the other submariners I've met, there's always a little bit of the pirate in them, a little bit of that slightly anti-authoritarian, I don't do it your way, I do it my way, but I do it the best way.
Absolutely.
And that's perhaps some of the background where I come from. I always wanted to join the Navy. I can't remember a time when I didn't. And perhaps it goes back to my parents. My father was a radio officer in the Royal Navy during World War II on carriers. My mother was a Wren, that's a female member of the Royal Navy.
Is it safe to say that all parents from that generation, all people were involved in the war? Because, it was right across the channel.
Exactly. Pretty much every parent, every friend I had, their parents had been in the forces or involved in the wartime effort.
Probably not any different. Yeah, my grandparents or my parents were involved in the war too.
In the same way. Mm-hmm. My parents were both radio operators. My mother intercepted German signal traffic, strangely German U-boat signal traffic, and passed it on down to Bletchley Park, where they decoded it using the Enigma first computers to break the German Enigma codes. Mm. They were both so good at radio Morse code, they would talk to each other in Morse code when they didn't want me to know what my birthday present was going to be.
Oh, they did that when you were growing up? No kidding.
When I was growing up, they would go dit da da dit da, and I wouldn't have a clue.
That's incredible. There's not too many people can say that story. That's a good story. Yeah. I like that.
So my father was away a lot at sea. When he left the Royal Navy at the end of the war, he went into the Merchant Navy. He was a radio officer on tramp steamers. He spent some time down in the South Atlantic with the Norwegian whaling fleet, looking into modern early use of sonars to search for fish and whales. And I assumed that was the natural state. Fathers went to sea, came home occasionally with a bag of presents, and then they went back off to sea.
Yeah, that's reasonable to think that way. Yeah.
So I can't remember a time when I was not dedicated to joining the Royal Navy. I read widely, but I loved the Hornblower series. I don't know if they were read or they're available in the States.
Yeah, that came out, was it, I don't know if there was a History Channel, late 1990s, 2000, the whole series, like a video series. It was pretty good, and I recommend it if you haven't seen it.
Well, that kind of gave me a little more detail, and my father told me very clearly that if I wanted to join the Royal Navy, I had to go in as an officer. He spent 4 years in the Royal Navy as a rating during the war. Conditions were not great, and he recognised that life in the wardroom was a slightly more comfortable life than life on the lower deck. And he insisted.
About what age are you making these decisions? You know, when you're like,
well, I took an exam when I was 14 and won a scholarship to join Britannia Royal Naval College, which is the officers' training college for the Royal Navy.
Oh, so they started earlier.
12 years old. 12 years old. I'd made my decision. 14, under pressure from my father, I'd gone in to become an officer. I didn't start until I was 18, but I'd made that decision early.
So this school at 14, it's like a military type school?
No. I was an absolutely standard British school, what we call a grammar school, which is
grammar education. Okay.
A selective education, but it's not a private school. It's not anything particularly posh or special. I remember just after I'd won my scholarship, which strangely they called it a scholarship, but apparently my father had too much money to warrant them giving me any money, which was a disappointment to me. My grandmother gave me a book called Send Down a Dove. It's by an author called Charles McCarty, and he served in diesel submarines during World War II in the Mediterranean. And it's a story of a leading hand serving on patrol in a submarine, and it gripped me. And I knew I wanted to go. It is. I can recommend it. It's long out of print, but it's a good book. And the title actually comes from a poem. The title is "Send Down a Dove," and the little poem or ditty is "Good Lord above, send down a dove, with wings as sharp as razors, to cut the throats of them there blokes that sells bad beer to sailors." And we went on from there. Anyway, I won my scholarship to join Dartmouth, Britannia Royal Naval College at Dartmouth, and 4 years later I passed my various scholarship exams.
Can we talk about Dartmouth? Is that like an ROTC type college? How
can
I equate that with the United States? Is similar to that?
Well, it's equivalent to West Point or Annapolis.
Oh, so it's like a regular military academy. So you probably had senior enlisted guys helping you.
We had senior enlisted guys. In fact, we all arrived by train. The only way you could get to Dartmouth was by train. We arrived on this old-fashioned steam-driven train. Right. We took a ferry across the river, and then at the bottom of the hill, we were met by a series of petty officers and chief petty officers.
Oh, petty officers!
Who shouted at us in the old-fashioned traditional way. Right. Yeah. And 250 spotty-faced young men marched up the hill carrying our suitcases until we arrived at the college.
That's a great.
And then we were faced with what every Navy man remembers, whatever rank, whatever rate. We've all gone into, I think US you call it boot camp, we call it a training establishment, and we were harangued and harassed from morning till night. We ran races, we did physical exercise, we had lectures and training and all kinds of things. We learned to recognize different weapon systems, learned to recognize the badges. How do you salute? How do you polish your boots? How do you square away your locker and make it look tidy? All of that. And that was the first year of training. Within that year, we went to sea in a frigate, and all the officers were messed as if they were junior rates. We actually slept in hammocks. We still had hammocks in the Royal Navy in those days. And we worked as sailors. We worked our part of ship. We chipped paint.
Did you wear like an enlisted uniform or worked as regular enlisted type?
We wore working dress. And we just had one tiny badge on our shoulder to distinguish us as trainee officers. But we were cadets.
Oh, okay. So
we were the lowest.
No, yeah, okay.
We were the lowest low. But it was a very beneficial 3 months. You lived as a sailor. You kept watches. You scrubbed the decks. You cleaned your mess. You did all that. And then on top of that, you had officer-like training as well. So it was a pretty busy day. But I was talking to a good friend of mine who's now retired and lives in Louisiana, and he and I still reminisce about the days on the Dartmouth training squadron, and the day we literally painted ourselves into the corner, painting the deck, painting the deck,
so
painting the deck,
and
then suddenly we realised we were hard up against the bulkhead and we can't get out without walking over the wet deck.
Yeah,
that's the sort of things we learned. But I found Britannia Royal Naval College, Naval Training Establishment, it was quite a contrast to my schooling. My schooling had been at a grammar school, a very country, a rural grammar school, and the formality and the degree of hierarchy didn't quite sit well with me.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate. I was spotted by somebody who's slightly more senior and asked if I'd like to go to university. I jumped at the chance, and my name was marked off and told that I was going off to London University for 3 years, which was a fantastic opportunity. But of course, whilst I was at Dartmouth, we spent lots of time in different ships and aircraft to give us a flavour of what the Navy had to offer and what we might have to offer the Navy.
And did you see stark differences in how the Navy was at different platforms?
Very, very different. I went aboard an aircraft carrier. It's still probably the largest ship I've ever set foot aboard, and there were so many decks, there were so many officers, a single officer couldn't really make a difference, unless you were the captain. And it had a crew of 2,500 men. And then, having done that, having spent 2 days at sea getting lost aboard an aircraft carrier, we went back to the college, and a diesel submarine came into the creek below the college. 2,000-ton diesel submarine.
What's that thing?
Exactly. And we went down. We walked down the hill to the quay side, and we stepped aboard this diesel submarine. The captain, I didn't know he was the captain. He was just this chap standing there in a pair of filthy jeans, an old rugby shirt, football shirt in your terms, I suppose, and a scarf round his neck. And he was scruffy. But then he took the boat to sea, and he was clearly a supreme professional.
You could tell.
And you could tell.
He wasn't dressed the part. He performed the part.
He didn't need stripes on his shoulder or rings on his arm to show that he was in charge. He was the man in charge.
Right.
And in a small crew, everybody looked to him, and that inspired me. That gave me. That's what I want to do.
That's good. Yeah.
But before I could get to university, I had to complete a year as a midshipman, very old-fashioned naval rank, and I joined a
what's
frigate.
The difference? You're called midshipmen when you're in ROTC and our four-year universities. I mean, what would be the difference between the Royal Navy and ours as far as being a midshipman? Because when I was looking at the rank structure, it looked like midshipman was like an official type rank, and your officer.
It's an official rank in that it's recognized, and anybody will see that you are an officer, but it is not you're not yet a commissioned officer.
No, but
so the Queen has not yet sent you a letter saying you have been commissioned into the Royal Navy. So it's still a training.
So it's like being recommended by a congressman, but the Queen makes you an officer. Wow.
Yep, I have a piece of paper, well, not a piece of paper, a piece of vellum, signed on behalf of the Queen. It's not actually the Queen's signature, but that hangs on my that hangs on my wall.
Great story. I like that.
Yes, please.
Get a
please
copy
commission me.
Post that. That'd be great. Yeah, that's a good thing. Yeah.
I'll see if I can get you a copy of it for you.
All right.
So I then spent 3 years in London, which 3 years in London on naval pay and naval allowances. I won't go into the detail, but I enjoyed myself immensely in London. It's a great city.
It's sailor stuff. It happens.
Sailor stuff. As you say, it happens. Once I finished university, the Royal Navy took me back into their arms, told me to get my hair cut. In those days I had hair, and put me through the next stages of training, which were courses in pretty much everything: meteorology, navigation, ship recognition. I tried my hand at flying aircraft. I tried my hand at flying helicopters, but nothing changed my mind. I wanted to become a submariner.
So it kind of stuck with you from the first time you saw that diesel boat?
I stuck with it from that first diesel. I stuck with it before that first diesel boat. That was where I was going.
Wow, okay.
I stay committed. My first diesel boat was a submarine called HMS Otter. It was actually a target boat. She'd been padded so that dummy torpedoes could be fired at her.
When was that boat commissioned?
Otter was commissioned in the mid-60s.
Oh, so
I joined her.
So you joined. I mean, you were commissioned in the early 70s, right?
That's right.
So 60s.
So she wasn't
that old at all. Yeah.
Oh no, she wasn't an old boat at all. I joined her in the summer of '76. She'd just returned from a States trip. She'd been out to Ortec. Is that a phrase you recognise?
Ortec, yes, Bahamas. I definitely know about Ortec. So I didn't know you guys
of course
use
you would do
Ortec
it
too. I guess everybody uses it. What the heck?
And that's it.
It's a party.
Well, she'd been out in Ortec as a target boat, both for US submarines and for British submarines on Ortec, testing out weapon systems.
Wow.
And she was based in Faslane on the Clyde River, just north of Glasgow. An interesting spot. On a fine day, you can find few places more beautiful. On an average day, you find few places drier.
That begs the question. Me being stationed over, I was a station. I did patrols at Ahoy, like I was stationed out of Connecticut. But I mean, how far away was the lock from the Faslane Naval Base? I mean, we always heard about it, but nobody. I don't think they really described where it was. Huh?
Holy Lock was about 4 miles. 4 miles by sea.
Really? So if we wanted to take a cab, we could have, huh?
You could have done it so easily, and you'd have been royally entertained by the Royal Navy. I promise you.
I can't. All those years over there, because that would have been a party. Because going out on British, which we'll talk about that. By the way, we haven't mentioned it. We're going to do at least 2 parts, but maybe 3-part series on this with the Ian Whitehouse, and maybe we'll get into some more of that about. When he was on like you said, he was on the Rickover, which was a fast attack submarine, and of course I did a couple missile ops off of UK boats too as well. So yeah, we can get into that later. But yeah, I didn't know it was that close, because that would have been a party if we got down around with the UK states, because we partied real good with them on the boat. Let me tell you.
I bet you did. We do know how to party.
Yeah, you guys got it going. I'm not going to take that away from you. You guys got it going on.
So I joined Otter. Part 3 training, as ever. Part 3 training. Do you use the term Part 3 in your Navy, or just the trainee?
No. You might describe what Part 3 means.
I do. Parts 1, 2, and 3 are the basic training for any naval personnel in the Royal Navy. Part 1 is your training about becoming a naval person.
Okay.
You learn to march, you learn to salute, you learn to recognise what the Navy is about. Part 2 is your professional training as a sonar man, as a radio man, as an engineer, whatever it might be. And Part 3 is where you bring those 2 parts together and learn how to operate at sea in the ship that you've been assigned to.
And Part 2 kind of designate what kind of officer you're going to come? Like if you're going to be a sonar
to an extent,
engineer
yes.
Officer?
That's it, yeah.
Okay, all right, yeah. I'm glad you described that.
And then part 3 training is your basic training at sea in the ship that you're going to be spending your career in, or the types of ship you're going to be spending your career in. Submarine service differs dramatically from surface ships. Surface ships, your Part 3 training will consist of knowing the compartment you're working in.
Okay.
Submarines, as you'll remember, Eric, you have to know the entire ship. You have to know all the systems. You have to trace them. I think you have some of the drawings I've made there.
Yeah. I was looking at it. It looked like all drawings that I had to make myself qualifying.
Yeah, all those drawings. You're not allowed back.
It's a little bit different. Let me get some of those up. So all these images will be posted when you see the video for this sketchbook. Let me see if we can get to some of the drawings. There's one.
There we are. Yeah.
It's mainline. Is that hydraulics?
That's mainline hydraulics, I think. Yep.
Yeah,
but that's almost 50 years old now. But that's
high pressure air system. Yeah.
I still have the notebook.
Yeah.
And
it's good to have that. Still, that's great.
Like all trainee submariners, I wasn't allowed in the mess to lax. If I wasn't on watch, I had to be out there tracing my systems.
Same thing,
and learning.
American boat. You're not allowed to. You're not allowed to do anything, even sleep. You get your.
That's well. They looked at me and said, "There's your bunk," pointed at the trainee's bunk, and it was 4 foot 9 inches long. If I were to stand up, you'll see I'm 6'5", and I'm pointing this out to.
I saw that in your bio. Yeah, so you had to learn to dodge and weave everywhere you went.
I did indeed, and that's why there's
on your forehead and everything. Huh?
Not so much hair there now, but the response was, "You might be 6'5", but that short bunk over there is the Part 3's bunk. That's your bunk, no change."
Oh man, yeah. Squeezed in there.
I know the U.S. Navy used to operate some diesel submarines. The Barbell class, I think, was your last diesel boats.
Yeah, right.
You had three of them.
Yeah, decom late 80s, I think. Yeah.
But for your viewers that don't really have much experience with diesel submarines, the diesel submarine in the Royal Navy, 2,000 tons, crew of 65, commanding officer, 4 seaman officers, a weapons/electrical officer, and an engineer officer. That was it.
Right. Does the Royal Navy still operate diesel submarines?
No, unfortunately not. They phased them out in about 1999.
Okay.
We built a new class of diesel submarines, and the Upholder class. They were pretty successful as submarines, but they were becoming a distraction when the Royal Navy wanted to go all nuclear. Right. So we sold them to the Canadian Navy, and the Canadian Navy.
It's interesting that Russia is still investing so much money in diesel submarines.
Well,
this kilo class. You know,
if you're operating in a literal sense close to the coast,
okay,
a diesel submarine at 2,000 tons, it's small, it's agile, on electric power, on battery power, it's virtually indetectable.
Very quiet.
It's perfect for intelligence gathering on coastlines. It's perfect for landing special forces. You wouldn't want to commit a 7, 8, 10,000 ton nuclear powered ship in shallow waters. So the diesel boat has a role still.
That's a good point. And we built our new class for Lord Admiral Pops. That's interesting you bring that up. And it's cheaper for countries that can't afford the nuclear, obviously.
Oh, of course.
Have access to it to buy them. Yeah, they're selling kilo classes like crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. The Germans are still, and the Swedish are still selling good, small diesel submarines.
Those are AIP. Have you ever been on board AIP?
I haven't tried air independent propulsion, but I'd be interested to see how they go. But of course, the technology's moved on. The endurance of these boats is very, very much better than it ever was. Mm-hmm. But my Part 3 training phase confirmed my decision to join submarines. They were informal in terms of the structure, the hierarchy. They were professional, and they were fun. There was no snobbishness about it. That's an English phrase that means being class ridden. There was no class structure in a submarine. Your respect was based on ability, experience, and knowledge, not on your stripes on your shoulder.
Yeah, I guess there was a picture. I thought I uploaded it, but it was a picture of the World War II cartoon or World War One?
A World War I cartoon.
Yeah,
yes,
I'll make sure that's uploaded. Yeah, it shows an Army officer and he's all official and ready to make people do push-ups, and there's a Navy officer. He's all laid back,
And the Army officer.
Uploaded, yeah, I thought I uploaded it, but I didn't. Yeah, but so you probably noticed the difference right away. When you were on a submarine for the first time, and the way you interacted with the enlisted and had to build up respect. And
yep, and there's no way of building. There's no trick to building respect. You just have to be professional. You just have to know your stuff. Right. They have to see you scurrying around, learning your trade, literally.
Just, I mean, what I noticed too. I mean, which was really odd because I could see how relaxed the crew was on the boat, but when they went into an operation, like a missile operation, I mean, they got dead serious, highly professional, and you did not get in the way because normally I can interrupt the missile crew, on an op in England, but you're not interrupting anybody that it's on the English side. Once they're engaged in not, you stay out of the way. I mean, they're dead serious. But like I said, when they're not, laid back guys. I mean, that's
how it was.
We go back and forth. Yeah.
We knew how to relax and what have you. Once I completed my training, I left the Otter and went south to the 1st Submarine Squadron, which was based in Gosport, Hampshire. And I joined a submarine called Sea Lion, much the same class of boat, much the same age, about 10 or 15 years old at that time. She was just coming out of a refit, so we had to recommission the submarine. And a nice formal ceremony.
Period for that for a boat?
About 18 months to refit a diesel boat.
So I can understand recommissioning. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
So we recommissioned the submarine, and one of our guests of honour was a World War II submarine ace called Ben Bryant. He had commanded HMS Sea Lion during the Second World War. He came aboard. I had to show him around as a junior officer. One of my responsibilities as a junior officer was the weapons compartment, the fore ends, where we were fitted with very old-fashioned Mark 8 torpedoes.
Okay.
Admiral Ben Bryant, this is now 30 years since the end of the Second World War, looks at Mark 8 torpedoes and says something along the lines of, "Those damn things didn't work too well in World War II. Why are we still using them?"
Why are we still using them? Like, what makes it?
Our weapon systems hadn't advanced as quickly as they should have done.
Huh?
We were still using World War II era, albeit technologically enhanced.
Could that
World
been
War
because
II era torpedoes?
Great Britain was still in a
70s.
reconstruction period? It was probably just lack of money.
It was a combination of lack of money. There was a lot of research going into new torpedoes to be deployed, and behind the scenes, a new wire-guided, electric-powered torpedo was being developed as an anti-submarine torpedo. Right. But until that point, most boats were still fitted out with an anti-surface ship torpedo rather than an anti-submarine torpedo.
You're using the American torpedoes. I'm trying to remember what Mark 19 comes to mind for some reason. Maybe that's an older one, but I mean, it could. Well, I wanted to ask you, what makes a submarine ace? What's the qualifying?
It's a combination of three things, I think. Well, luck comes into it for a start.
Yeah, that's true.
You didn't run into a mine in the Mediterranean or something like that. Tonnage sunk. How many ships did you sink? And how many of those ships were warships as opposed to less challenging, if you like, merchant ships or troop carriers? And thirdly was some degree of character. It seems that all the aces had some extra little something in their character, some charisma,
some kind of suave type charisma.
Let them lead their men in a particular fashion. And there were a number of them. And of course, when we think of World War II and submarines, the Americans did great things out in the Pacific. We do a long-range submarines against the Japanese forces. Right. The British operated in the Mediterranean and the North Sea and around the Norwegian coast. But neither of us really had the numbers or the targets that the German U-boats had. Right. And of course, the German U-boats, that's where we perhaps think of World War II submarining. But we should also remember that the U-boat arm, 40,000 men went to sea with the German U-boats. 30,000 of those men never returned.
Yeah, there's a lot. A lot of people don't know that. They don't realize how many U-boats were sunk. A lot of them were.
They were 40,000 men. I think they got up to about 850 submarines they built in the end during the course of World War II.
They did a lot of damage. I mean, we're gonna give you that.
Oh, they did.
They didn't sink doing nothing. They did.
I don't know if you want to include this clip or not, but when I met my wife's parents for the first time, I discovered that my prospective father-in-law had been a merchant navy officer in World War II.
Okay.
And he had been sunk twice by German U-boats.
You got to be kidding.
Or attacked twice.
Oh,
First time the ship The ship sank under him, and he had to go to the lifeboats and spend a day and a half in a lifeboat. The second time, the ship was in ballast. It was traveling to the US to pick up oil. It was a tanker. Second time the ship was damaged, it was towed into Guantanamo, interestingly. So when he was introduced to his future son-in-law, who was a submariner, his first response was, "You something or other sank me twice during the war."
It wasn't me.
It wasn't me. No, it wasn't exactly.
Different country. That's a great story. Yeah, I'm glad you said something.
So, having spent 18 months in my second submarine, my first proper commissioned role as opposed to a trainee.
Yeah, you were commissioned at this point, of course. And
I was commissioned by that point. Yeah.
So you're a weaponeer. It was your.
I was responsible for the torpedoes, the weapons, but my profession, and perhaps this is time to take a moment out. The Royal Navy has three principal branches.
Okay.
The executive branch, we call them seamen. The engineering branch, where you might be a weapons officer or you might be an engineer, marine engineer.
Okay.
And then we have a logistics branch responsible for supplies and personnel and stuff like that. Only the executive seaman branch can command a ship at sea. The engineers and the logistics men and women these days do not command ships at sea. And that's a significant difference to the American Navy, where the majority of your officers are twin trained, if you like. They're engineers, as well as, certainly in the submarine service, as well as being executive officers.
Hello, Admiral, and that's a good segue from World War II. I mean, here we went from, obviously, I think English submarines are the same thing as American submarines with their long-range submarines in the Pacific. They kind of got that cowboy thing, taking things to the limit. Matter of fact, they relieved senior captains because they were up from World War I era, and they just didn't want to take the chance to sink into the Japanese. So they had this attitude, that charisma you were talking about, and it just wasn't there. And then Rickover takes over, and we're taking reactors to sea instead of weapon systems.
That's right, and Admiral Rickover did at one stage when the U.S. and the Royal Navy, U.S. Navy and the Royal Navy came to the agreement in 1958, which was an agreement on transfer of nuclear technology.
Right.
Admiral Rickover pressed very, very hard to have the right of veto over Royal Navy submarine officers as to whether or not they should go to sea in our submarines.
I did not know that either.
And the first Sea Lord, our senior naval officer at the time, was Admiral Lord Mountbatten, a relative of the Queen, and he pressed back very hard and said no other nation will ever choose our officers. He just would not allow that.
I mean, because being in your own country, you should do what you think's right for you. That was the right call.
That's right.
But what it means is, without Rickover, though, I don't think we would have the safe reactor. I mean, I'm going to give that.
I would not knock Rickover.
I want to make sure, because I feel like my discussion, I was taking something away from Rickover. Rickover needed to happen, obviously.
Oh yes,
but
Rickover brought a professionalism that submariners needed, and there was a generation of Royal Navy submariners that went over to the States, to learn about nuclear propulsion, to learn about nuclear engineering, and to understand it. And they brought that same professionalism back. That's not to say our World War II forebears and our diesel submarine colleagues are not professional, but we had to take it up a notch when you have a nuclear reactor on board. But there is this distinct difference, and I saw it when I spent time on patrol with the Rickover.
Okay.
We sailed from Virginia, Norfolk, Virginia, and we were heading north. I won't go into any more detail where we're heading, but we were heading north. And we were not quite in the patrol area. One of my responsibilities, I was what was called the command rider. I was providing intelligence support to the control room.
Okay.
And I was training the team in what they might expect to find. And there was an engineering problem. I don't think it was a truly significant engineering problem, but there was an engineering problem. And we were approaching the patrol area. And the commanding officer felt that only he had sufficient engineering expertise to tackle this problem. So he went aft. He went aft to the maneuvering room, to the engineering spaces, and he left the XO in command of the tactical picture.
And
the Royal Navy,
that would never happen in the Royal Navy.
We would not do that. The commanding officer would stay in charge of the tactical picture, and he would expect his engineer to brief him in detail on the impact of any problem.
Right.
So the captain knew where the constraints were, what he could or could not do with his ship, but he would not try to second guess the engineer. That would not be
trust in your crew and your
in your subordinates. I'm not saying which way is right and which way is wrong. It's just these are different ways.
I think that's not
tackling.
American doctrine. That's probably boat to boat. Different captain's discretion is what I would call that. I wouldn't expect other captain to do that. So that's interesting that happened though.
Yeah. So having completed my first appointment as a torpedo officer, it was time for me to get into another role, another job. So I completed a formal 8-week navigation course to qualify me as a navigator. Reminded me of how to carry out astronavigation and so on. Not that we ever used it, but we had to learn it.
And that's navigation by stars, or
navigation by stars.
Okay.
All our periscopes, and I think your periscopes also were.
They were still doing
fitted
that
with
when I was
sextants.
in the 80s. So I wonder if they're still doing that. They got to. They at some point. They
Well, I'm not sure because, of course, most boats now don't have hull penetrating masts, so you can't. They just put a video camera up.
Good point. I didn't think of that. Yeah, they might.
So I'm not sure how they play that. But anyway, I also then had to complete a nuclear conversion course to learn about nuclear engineering, not so that I could become an engineer, as we've discussed, but so that I understood it to the point where I could converse with the engineer and he could explain to me where issues were.
This is kind of preparing you for the executive class by taking that.
That's
if you become
right.
an engineer, you're going to be that's going to be your career, engineering.
Yeah, but I was not going down that route, but I had to understand sufficient of nuclear engineering. Even now, 30 odd years later, 40 years later, I could draw you a schematic of how a nuclear reactor works, what the control rods do, and how we connect it to the engineering system to power a submarine.
Yeah, makes sense.
But I wouldn't ever trust myself to start managing a nuclear reactor in any way. So the nuclear engineering course was held, strangely, at the Royal Naval College in Greenwich, just outside London. It's a beautiful building. I think I've given you a shot of what's called the Painted Hall.
Yeah, I did get that one on here. Right behind me.
That's it.
Yeah.
The Painted Hall at Greenwich. It's a 300-year-old, 400-year-old building, almost 300-year-old building.
It's beautiful.
Created by
something on the roof. Is that painting or is that?
That's painting. That's the most amazing. Sistine Chapel is very similar. It's that quality of decoration.
And that's,
it was built.
Yeah, a lot of stuff like that. If people haven't toured Europe, they probably wouldn't understand. But yeah, I went over Germany and saw a lot of stuff like that.
That's it.
That's beautiful, though. Yeah.
It was built by Charles II, and part of it was to be a home for pensioned-off naval personnel.
Huh.
But the Navy hung on to it and turned it into a college for staff officers and training. And the college itself actually had a small nuclear reactor that we could play with to learn how to operate the control rods and so on and control the reactor.
So similar to a prototype, I guess.
Yeah, very small
a light
one.
version of prototype.
I then joined my first nuclear submarine called HMS Spartan. She was a Swiftshore class submarine. She was in build in Barrow. So I stood by her for 4 months as she came out of build, and we then took her to sea.
Looking at that looks like it was quite a capable boat, similar to maybe the Los Angeles class. Would you?
Very similar to Los Angeles class. She was the first. Our early nuclear submarines, Dreadnought, was very much based on a US skipjack reactor compartment and general design. The Swiftshore class went away from the teardrop-shaped hull and became the total cylinder hull.
Right.
She was slightly shorter, about 85 meters, I think, in length from memory. We built 6 boats. They were extremely quiet. They incorporated the latest noise reduction technology that was available then in the 80s. And she was equipped to use the towed array low frequency passive sonar systems, and all but one of them were powered by what was then top secret but now is no longer top secret, a propulsor, a jet pump rather than a propeller. and that all added to the incredible quiet operation. This submarine was propulsor. An absolute pig to handle on the surface, but glorious underwater.
Were you guys the first to use a propulsor? Because it seems like we.
I'm not sure we have. I think the U.S. Navy and the Royal Navy introduced them much the same time.
Same time, okay.
But it did make a difference. For a while, Spartan was possibly the quietest nuclear submarine in the world, and I include the U.S. Navy at that time. We did some trials on Alltech against a Los Angeles class to just see who could beat who. And I think we call it a score draw, probably.
Yeah.
But I do remember we took the boat to sea trials, and we had to do a high speed run to check maximum power, and I was able to balance a coin on its edge on the waterroom table at full power. That was a very stable.
That's a stable platform right there.
Submarine. That's right. And I said we ward gamed with the US submarine on Alltech, and we came out with a score draw there, perhaps. The next stage of my submarine career, all of this, every level is training,
right?
But they increase responsibilities. I was one of two watch leaders, so we had the navigator, me, and my opposite number was the sonar officer, responsible for the sonar systems, and we worked 6 hours on, 6 hours off as watch leaders.
Right.
And we were responsible for everything that was going on in the submarine during our 6 hours on watch.
It was like officer of the deck. What would you call your version of the officer of the deck?
We would just call them watch leaders. Exactly like the officer of the deck. The captain and the XO would also share the day, but they didn't share it formally. They didn't divide it up into, you've got these hours, I've got these hours. It's a much more informal arrangement. And the one thing we didn't do either, I noticed it again in the RICO, it's the only contrast I have. When the captain came into the control room in our submarine, he just wandered in and took a seat.
Yeah.
And nobody shared.
No attention on deck or
nothing like that. He just came in, helped by the fact the captain's cabin actually was almost part of the control room. Mm-hmm. We on the port side we had a bank of fire control systems. Just behind the fire control systems was the door to the captain's cabin. Like all captains at sea, he never actually had the door shut. He just had a curtain across, and he could hear everything that went on in the control room. So he was always part of it.
It's probably helpful that they adopt that type style, because if you're engaged in something, like you got a sonar track running, or you're periscope depth ops or something. I mean, obviously the cap would probably be up there as a periscope, but I mean, if you're doing something, it doesn't change the continence or the atmosphere of the control room.
No.
By that,
no.
Where our captain walks in, everybody just kind of stiffens up and it kind of changes the atmosphere a little bit.
It does a bit.
Yeah.
And I know that in the next interview you want to discuss contrast between the U.S. Navy and the Royal Navy.
Oh, so yeah, that's going to be all about the parachute. We're going to have fun with that.
Yeah. But I think you've also, whilst I was a watch leader, we were at sea and we took a retired admiral who was a keen amateur artist to sea, and my logo on my social media accounts and everything else is that painting of me wound around a periscope.
Yeah, that's a great picture. I love that. That's great. Yeah, great.
And the admiral rather took to that, but I have a copy of that painting at home.
How many years in the Navy were you at this point?
1978. I'd been in the Navy 8 years by then.
8 years. So, in your mind, were you committed to a career at this point, or
yes, absolutely.
I decide that it's not for them at this point, and sometimes get out.
Officers peel off at all levels through a career.
4, 5, 6 years.
Yeah. We didn't sign up for a committed period. I was what was called a generalist officer. That meant I was in the Navy for as long as the Navy wanted me, and as long as I wanted to be in the Navy. It was sort of open-ended contract.
Oh, okay.
And the only reason I would have left the Navy at that stage is if I'd have found I couldn't do it, I suppose. If I found I wasn't hacking it. But I was still enjoying it. I was, I think, pretty good at it. Certainly people seem to
we'll get
respond.
into what happens to people that don't survive the parachute on the next one. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
But anyways, yeah.
So by 1980, Spartan was at sea. She'd been commissioned into the Royal Navy, been accepted from the build, and we went off on our first patrol, and it was the first brand new boat, first operational patrol I'd conducted. Diesel boats did carry out some of these operational patrols, but not so often. So our first patrol, we went toward the north, and using our newly developed low frequency TMA target motion analysis algorithms, we detected, intercepted, and then followed a Charlie 2 SSGN for 2 days. And that was the first time I'd ever been in close proximity with a Soviet submarine.
And you were classified as a navigator at this time.
I was a navigator. I was the watch leader, and my job was to conduct the ship, conduct the maneuvers, conduct the target motion analysis, and present my tactical analysis, the tactical picture that I was building up to the captain, so that the captain could make the decisions he needed to make.
You spent all these years training as an officer, and now you're considered the expert here as a watch leader and navigator. What was that feeling like the first time you trailed a Soviet submarine? I mean, what was your feeling? What was the control room? That was
a high point. That was a culmination. We knew this is what we were meant to be doing, and then we were actually doing it. We'd been through the training, and this towed arrays in the early 80s were new technology. Low frequency sonar tracking was new technology. We didn't have standard operating procedures developed by that point. We didn't have handbooks at that point. I was using the notes, the handwritten notes I'd made.
Yeah, exciting stuff.
And I even had to go out and buy a pocket calculator, which in 1980 was pretty new technology and pretty expensive.
It was expensive too, and people
so that I could do the
don't know what a pocket calculator is, or a slide.
So I could do the math to work out if we had a closing Doppler, an opening Doppler, and what the range might be.
Yeah, so you're doing sine, cosine, and all that kind of stuff, right?
All that stuff. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Our next patrol, our next intercept wasn't quite as successful. We intercepted a rare Soviet submarine, the Alpha class. Titanium hulled, but that didn't go.
Huh? Yeah, titanium. That was the newer classes.
Yeah, that was a new experimental hull that the Soviets developed, very deep diving and very fast. But she carried out Crazy Ivan. She turned and found us in her stern arcs. She went active, and with a 10-knot speed advantage, it took us the best part of 14 hours to break contact.
This is a great. I mean, this is stuff you hear in the movies, but it's the real thing.
Well,
I want people to realize too that this is not OPSEC type stuff we're talking about. This is released.
This is not secure. This is no longer classified information. This is in the public domain. You can read about it in some of the books. I'll recommend later.
In the U.S. domain, it's just I guess they don't advertise it as much. But I mean, I think it's important to release this kind of history.
Yeah. Well, you said, how did I feel when I first made contact with the Soviet submarine? I felt fantastic. The next time I made contact with the Soviet submarine, it was pinging active sonar at me. I came to take over the watch.
Yeah, that was my next question. Was there any bouts of fear?
Yeah, there was. I wouldn't say it was fear, but there was a certain tightening of certain orifices whilst we.
It's a little bit of tightening.
Whilst we worked out what we were going to be doing.
What were we going to do? Yeah, we got to get above the layer or below the layer. You got.
Well, we did everything. We went above the layer, below the layer. We went to top speed. We did high speed jinks, and went all over the show.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, I can't. But
I think the thing that strikes me now, and it's only in retrospect, because my colleague and I, the other watch leader, a chap who was my size but twice as wide, known as Tiny, inevitably. He and I were very much in charge during these episodes. When we were training the Charlie, it was the watch leader that was leading the maneuvers.
So the captain stood back and just let you do.
Yeah, the captain, and I think the captain stood back for two reasons. One, he was of a previous generation. So by being of a previous generation, he most of his experience had been in diesel boats.
Right.
So he had the seniority and he had the experience at sea, but he didn't have the in-depth knowledge and training that we more junior officers had in the new techniques and the new technology. Our XO was different. The XO on Spartan was a chap called Dan Connolly, and Dan was a thinking man, an experimenter. He wanted to rewrite the tactical doctrine, and he was very much in the mix. He wanted
you were in
to.
A place you had a new tow array. You had a new boat. I mean,
that's right. He wanted to try this out.
How do we? Yeah.
How do we deploy these? How do we use these?
That's exciting stuff right there.
But again, in retrospect, I was 27 years old, and I was in charge of a nuclear submarine. Interacting.
It's something else. I try to
with
tell
the Soviet submarine.
What you can do in
and I now look back 40 years later and think, they let me do that.
Yeah, isn't it funny? Yeah, I had the same recollection. I'm like, they let me run a launch team, launch rockets in the space of a submarine. That's crazy. That's 28, 29. I mean, it's nuts.
Absolutely nuts. We then, my next trip in Spartan took us over to Ortec. We mentioned that. We did some trials in Ortec. We had a very good time there, and I have some very fond memories of runs ashore in Canaveral.
Yeah, Canaveral's a classified area. I call it Area 51.
Yeah. Do they still have a bar called Rosie O'Grady's?
They did, but it's I remember that bar, but it's not there anymore. Yeah. I spent plenty of time there, huh?
I think some of the young ladies I met there are now very.
I can either confirm or deny that my guys called me the unofficial mayor of Cocoa Beach. You can take what you want out of that.
Yeah. This talk today, Eric, is about my sort of training up to the point where I was offered the opportunity to take command, and the next job I had was as the first lieutenant, as the second in command of a diesel submarine.
Yeah, so you did not have to go through the parachute course, which is
not to be second in command of a diesel.
XO. No. Okay, so how's that determined?
An officer's career in the Royal Navy is managed, and it's managed in a number of ways. Obviously, we have officers' reports, so the captain writes a report on all his officers on an annual basis. Mm-hmm. U.S. Navy, I know, does
same thing.
Does exactly the same thing. I think our senior officers tend to be a little more blunt.
I would agree.
So my first ever officer's report when I was a midshipman read something along the lines of, White House must remember the Royal Navy does not exist to transport him from party to party.
They put that on the eval?
That's written down in my
That's about as blunt as it gets right there, huh?
He must pay more attention to his task or role.
Well, I don't mean to interrupt, but I mean, thinking about kind of the stuff you just already said you did. I mean, the only way you get good at that as a crew is being blunt with each other. You have to be real with each other so you can connect in a certain way that I can't really describe how we came together, but it was just being real with each other. And if you did that in the corporate world, I mean, you'd be fired probably the next day for being blunt like that. But in submarines, it was just a way of life. Being blunt is the way we had to operate. We just had to be real with it. It's not hey, I'm not mad at you, but you did this.
Yeah,
and then,
that's it.
The next day it's corrected.
You cannot, in a submarine, you are operating automatically. Forget whether it's a war or you're on patrol or it's operational. If you're 500 feet underwater, you're automatically in a hostile environment.
Absolutely.
Mistakes cannot be tolerated.
Yep. It's the water's trying to get in, and the deeper you go, the worse it is. And then you got.
That's right.
Then you put a nuclear reactor in it, and then if you're a boomer, you got nuclear weapons. I mean, and then all the high explosives with the torpedoes, and then everybody's 22 to 30 years old. It's you have to be that way. If you're not blunt, you're not going to survive, or something bad's going to happen.
And some, of course, there are some officers and some senior rates who turn bluntness into an art form, but
I can imagine what that's like.
But anyway, to be selected as the first lieutenant of a diesel submarine, it was an essential precursor to going on to Perisher and being tested for potential command.
Right.
So I had to spend. There were a series of steps. You completed your Part 3 training. You did a junior officer's job. In my case, looking after the weapons on board. You did a watch leader's job on a nuclear boat. So I was navigator, watch leader. My next job was to be second in command of a diesel boat and learn some of the more managerial aspects of being a naval officer.
Right.
It's not all runs ashore and fighting. It's have we got enough food on board? Have we thought about next port of call? Where's the mail going to be redirected?
All the logistics and management.
All those sort of management stuff that you have to learn. Junior officer, you don't get into that. More senior you become, you have to be aware of it. So I had to do my year and a half as the XO of a diesel submarine, and I'm not sure whether I'd describe it as being fortunate or unfortunate, but my commanding officer sadly passed away now.
Sorry to hear that.
Somehow didn't quite have the charisma we were talking about before.
Right.
And he didn't have the respect of the crew. That made my job both easier and more difficult. It was easier.
Because it seems like that's usually a role, like a good cop, bad cop type thing.
Yeah, that's right.
That's not going on. Yeah.
It was easier in that I gained the crew's respect quite quickly, and they listened to me and they did what I felt they needed to do. Difficult in that I had to sometimes cover up or protect the captain from his own decisions or his own approach, and that was an interesting tension. But I suppose it unconsciously helped me learn a command style.
Right.
How do you command a ship? How do you lead men? You opened this conversation by quoting from the U.S. Navy Handbook on leadership.
Right.
And it's a perennial question in all military organizations and in all organizations, schools, offices, factories. What is leadership? Can leadership be taught?
Right.
Is leadership a natural attribute, or do you develop it?
And I had a gentleman on too. I don't know if you listen to that podcast. I mean, leadership is you keep learning new leadership styles constantly. You never, reach a pinnacle like I'm the leader.
I don't think you'll do. And I think leadership is something that is. I think as you become more experienced as a leader, you learn to tailor your style to the task in hand. Taking a warship to sea requires one kind of leadership. Driving a project through to build a new hospital, or take a cohort of students through a tough course to get them ready for university. They're different kinds of leadership. They require different kinds of style. But if you have been a leader in one arena, you will probably learn how to adapt your style to another arena.
You can adapt to more executive type management leadership styles. I mean, certainly differences, but you can adapt to it quicker than somebody else would. Well, I like you said the excellent captain stood about when you were a navigator on a Spartan. So you gained the trust of the men there. You're kind of leading the whole boat already. So you just, coming in XO wasn't like, I'm the XO now. You just kind of phased into it and realized you just had other tasks you had to learn, like you were saying.
It wasn't something that you consciously thought about. It was the next job, and you just took on the next job. It was and did your best at it.
Yeah.
And it's only, again, many of these things only become apparent that it was a training role. In some ways, every job is a training role for the next job.
Yeah.
And that's what it was. I had a task to do, but during that period, I was learning all the time as well.
Huh.
And it helped me in my subsequent career when I left the Navy. But that's again perhaps for a later conversation.
One part. Yeah. But interesting. Yeah, go ahead. So you were saying your XO, you were kind of having to help out with the captain because he was kind of unmanageable at some points. But
yeah, something like that. But the advantage it gave me was we mentioned Perisher much earlier in this conversation. Perisher in those days was carried out aboard a diesel submarine, and we were fortunate, whilst I was XO of this particular submarine, to take a Perisher course to sea. So I was able to observe Perisher at sea at very close quarters before I actually engaged with it. So
a rare chance to do that? Is that rare that happens for like?
It's not rare, but it's not normal.
It's not normal. Yeah. Okay.
No,
okay.
Somebody's going to have to observe it because it has to happen in a submarine. I was fortunate that it happened in the submarine I was in, so I got a close-up view of how perisher is conducted and how to handle it. The stress of perisher is a totally different subject, and we'll
it would give you an advantage if you're seeing it from the outside. I would think. Anyways,
touch on that. When we complete this conversation or the series of conversations that you'd like to have, will you be putting some of those links up for the guys to have a look at?
Absolutely.
The perisher program.
Link up you want. You tell me what links to put up after each part.
Well, I think the perisher link that I gave you, the diesel boat perisher link.
I put that one up already.
The BBC one. I'm sure the guys will find that.
Yeah, the other perisher. I think somebody texted me and said, or Facebooked me, messaged me, said it wasn't available over in the UK. But you can watch the newer perisher here. But I liked the older one that you sent me actually.
Yeah, obviously the newer one has evolved, and U.S. Navy officers now, some, I think one a year or maybe two a year, come over to experience our perisher.
During this I don't mean to sideline you there, but the Falklands War, was that during this time period? Were we getting in that?
Falklands War was 1982. At that stage I was in HMS Olympus. I was the XO, and I just received the signal.
You were XO at that time, okay.
I was XO, and I just received the signal announcing that I had been selected for perisher. So I knew now that I was the next.
So that's a good segue right there.
It was a good segue, but it was a kind of bittersweet is the wrong phrase, but I think like everybody in the military, you'd like to test yourself in a real fighting war. Could I do it? Could I hack it? Yeah. So what would have otherwise been a huge high point, selected for perisher, was not quite the high point, because at the same time
he took a new boat, trailed some Soviet submarines, and why not go down to the Falklands War? And
yeah, that's it. I didn't. Obviously I knew a number of people that did go down there, and it was a war that should never have happened, but it was a war that the Royal Navy demonstrated and the Royal and British military forces, but the Royal Navy in particular, demonstrated we still had the can-do ability to travel 10,000 miles and fight a war that far from our home bases. And submarines, as you know, played an immense part in that war.
If you don't see it, they're there, whether you like it or not.
Sorry?
If submarines are always there, I mean, people on surface ships, they look out there and I wonder if they're there. They're there.
Yeah, that's right. Although there was a certain amount of mind games played as to just how many submarines Britain had sent south, and how many were in the area, and it was never officially acknowledged how many boats were down there during the course of the conflict, because, as you say, a submarine is either there or not there, and you have to assume it is.
I was maybe 13 or 14 years old, so that was Margaret Thatcher, and Reagan was involved with that too.
Reagan, yep.
So that was considered sovereign land, the Falkland Islands, right? And then Argentina
it was sovereign British territory. The Argentinians invaded, and there had been various attempts by the Argentinians to lay claim to the Falkland Islands, but the Falkland Islanders had always stated very clearly they wanted to remain British.
Right.
There'd been various referenda in different times, various voting patterns, and they almost invariably returned a sort of 99% return that they wished to remain British.
Were they a Spanish-speaking colony?
No, they weren't. It was a totally British-speaking colony.
No, it's British. Okay, I didn't. Yeah, I was just because didn't know.
The history is long and quite complicated. I think the islands were first discovered, uninhabited, by a Spaniard. Then some French whalers lived on them for a little while. Then there was one of the interminable wars in the 18th century, and they changed hands a couple of times.
Right.
and the last man standing in charge of the Falkland Islands happened to be a British person. So he raised the Union flag, and they stayed British thereafter. And it was British people that went down to settle the islands.
I mean, we're getting towards the end of part one. It's late.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I don't have a lot more to add to my progression. I just, in summary, I would say that my career through the submarine service to the command exam, the perisher, was pretty much the standard route that any seaman officer in the Royal Navy submarine service would have taken. Part 3 training, that's 3 to 4 months.
Right.
18 months as a junior officer, 18 months as a watch leader, 18 months either as a second watch leader in another submarine or as an XO of a diesel boat, and then command.
Yeah, and that's why I want to make this second part. And the reason we were having three parts is because you're a volunteer in a Cold War project at a museum, and we want to spend some time on the Cold War and what you're doing with that museum as well. And then might be long parts. I mean, but I definitely want parachute to be separate because it's going to be a great talk. So
yeah, I'm very keen to talk about the museum as well at the end because. I was lucky enough, I visited the Nautilus last year when I was out in the States, and to step aboard the first ever nuclear-powered submarine was something special.
Yeah.
And there are only 3 nuclear-powered submarines on display to the public. USS Nautilus over at Groton, New London.
Uh-huh.
There's the French submarine WHITEHOUSE, which is on display in Cherbourg. And we have HMS Courageous, one of our earlier SSNs in Plymouth. But strictly she's scheduled for disposal. And so we're trying to create the funds to turn her into a permanent display. But she is already open to visitors, and we see about 5,000 visitors a year because she's inside the classified dockyard perimeter. Right. Whereas the Nautilus is open to the public fully, and I think she sees 125,000 people a year.
Does the
French boat is Redoutable.
Do they have active duty crew that has to monitor the reactor? Because like Nautilus has
that. The French submarine actually cut the reactor compartment out.
Okay.
Totally, and they had a boat of the same class that was not completed for financial reasons. Mm-hmm. So they took the part of the hull that would have been the reactor compartment in that uncompleted boat and slotted it back into the space, having taken the reactor out.
I've always wondered why we couldn't have done that, because we have a lot of boats we could have, like the Triton was a good one, the one in Circumnavigation of the world, that would have been a good one. Any of the 41 for Freedom, cut the reactor out. What about SALT II treaty, I think, prevented that.
Yeah.
But Los Angeles class is being decommissioned. I mean, I don't understand why we can't cut reactors out and weld them back to keep them, but it's treaties, politics, money.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of the hurdles. The 1958 agreement that transferred to nuclear technology requires us in the UK, when we decommission our submarines, to remove all the engineering, all the classified engineering equipment related to the reactor. So we've got to take the reactor out anyway for nuclear safety reasons.
That is a hurdle. Yeah, because the newer boats.
But we are obliged under that 58 treaty to take out all the engineering parts that relate to the nuclear power plant, which, if you think about it, is slightly illogical. Because we're now talking 60-year-old technology, and I can't believe that anybody who is ill-intentioned is going to go to a 60-year-old design nuclear submarine and go, "That's how I'm going to build my nuclear submarine." You know, they can Google a much better design.
Oh yeah, but countries are getting into the game. China, India. I'm trying to think of
very much.
Other ones. I mean, they're getting into the nuclear game, and
I think the strategic.
On that, but
the maritime strategic picture is one that's going to get a lot more interesting in the China Seas.
Yeah, maybe we can discuss maybe what your views on what current submarining's like on part 2 when we get towards the end of Perisher. That'd be an interesting conversation. I don't want to keep you up much later, but I appreciate having you on. Talking about your upbringing. I certainly like the fact that you're talking about your parents in World War II. I reflected on that because I asked you that question, because most people were related to people. Everybody was rebuilding England at the time. Europe was rebuilding, so everybody was you were part of World War II, whether you liked it or not. So you had an interesting upbringing, and you said, it was like natural that you were going to go into naval service because that's all you saw. I love the Morse code story. It was funny with your parents. And, I mean, that sounds like something parents would do. It's just how many parents know Morse code, but
exactly.
Yeah, that's great stuff. But
I think other parents would have just spelled.
Yeah, and I appreciate you disclosing some of the stuff that you worked on. I mean, which is unclassified, and we're gonna put links to that because U.S. still doesn't like to. It's out there. They just don't like to talk about it. There's books and videos that talk about, like the wiretapping we did and stuff like that.
Yes, yeah, that.
It's out.
I have that book on my shelf somewhere.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the name of that book. For one reason, I'm having brain fog right at this moment. But
I'm having the same. It's up there somewhere.
Sherry Long Tag or something like that, and it was another guy that wrote it. Yeah, I can't remember. But yeah, I mean, that's exciting being on a new boat and chasing the Soviet boats. I mean, because I was towards the end of Cold War. I can't imagine what that was like. I was never anywhere near anything like that, but. Yeah, that's. I really appreciate. I know it's late at night, and we're going to close this out.
Okay, well, I'll just for the next program.
If I was going to ask you if you wanted to mention any links or books for this phase.
Well, I'll mention some links. Well, first of all, I'll be putting that on for the next program.
Absolutely.
That is my commanding officer's hat.
You guys got the coolest submarine dolphins, by the way.
And then this one
VIP
was given to me.
Uh-huh. Yeah, there you go, CV-16.
When I sank the USS Saratoga, and I'll tell that story.
Okay.
Next time around.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good one, huh? Yeah.
The books I'd like to recommend is first of all this one, The Silent Deep, by Lord Peter Hennessy. That's a history of British submarine operations from 1945.
Can you hold that book up a little bit? Just put it up. There it is. Silent Deep. Okay.
Silent Deep. British submarine operations 1945 to 2010. Authorized by the Ministry of Defence and declassifies a lot of what we used to do and gives a very, very good picture. It's a heavy book. It's not a light read, but it's a very good read. This one, The Deadly Trade by Ian Ballantyne.
Okay,
this is a history of the Royal Navy Submarine Service from 1901 and submarines in general, written by a friend of mine. Another good book.
The Deadly Trade, okay.
This one, Cold War Command. I'll send you details separately, Eric. By Cold War Command. This was written by Dan Connolly, the executive officer I mentioned aboard HMS Spartan, and this is really his book about his time in submarines and his work on our weapon systems. And there are many others, but these are books I can recommend.
If you think of more in the next parts, definitely we're gonna put them up there. This is great stuff. Hey, this is really important for the project here that we're interviewing submarine veterans, and this is exactly the kind of things I really appreciate you answering the call that I put out there. I think I put out to a group over in UK. Anybody want to come on my show and talk about something? You graciously accepted and emailed me. I really appreciate that. Again, this is Commander Ian Whitehouse, retired of the Royal Navy, commander of several submarines, and he's going to be with us for a couple more parts where we get to talk about the Perisher next and then what he's doing now with the Museum in Cold War. I really appreciate your time, sir. I thank you again, and I think we're going to close this out. Any last comments? Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Eric. It's been a pleasure to reminisce with you. Thank you.
Hey, yeah, it's I feel the submarining between us. I mean, there's something might be different, but we got the same thing going on. Yeah, I appreciate it. All right,
different but the same.
Yeah, it is. I again appreciate it, sir. All right, guys. Make sure you hit us up on part 2, and we're gonna sign off here. This is Eric Ryle with thesubvet.com. You can email me at thesubvet@gmail.com if you'd like more information about coming on the website. I recommend you go to thesubvet.com. You can see all our podcasts and videos. We do a daily news feed, which is on the Facebook group. If you type in The Subvet, that is free. And then if you go to our Twitter handle, it's @thesubvet. You can also see a daily news feed if that's the way you prefer on those social platforms. that is free to use, and that's something we do. And we appreciate your time. We appreciate you watching the subvet.com. But this is Eric Ryle once again. It's 13 green and go, and have a fine Navy day.